If you have questions, please reserve your questions after we finish for the second presenter. May I call Brother Asadullah?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك رسولك وآله وصحبه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Nice to see everyone is still fairly awake. First, I'd like to thank the organizers and those who made this conference possible, Professor Kamali, Dr. Azam, and also Dr. Dawood. Thank you very much for allowing me a platform. I don't have much time to speak, so I'm going to do as best as I can in order to elucidate the main points of this presentation. I will be discussing litter in Malaysia, essentially, and sort of a reductive approach based on the maqasid. So let's wake up, okay? This is a young albatross, baby bird. As you can see, there are a number of bottle caps and even a lighter present in its stomach before it died. As a baby bird, and most babies of any animal species, it doesn't really understand what it's eating. It just seems to put things in its mouth. This is one of the consequences of littering, especially on beaches. And it's just for a visual presentation, sort of to get your mind on the topic. We won't be speaking much about this baby bird, but throughout the presentation, I want you to ask yourself the question, who is going to be responsible for this? Who's going to be responsible for this young baby bird dying because we were too lazy or too negligent to place our litter in the appropriate place? Umar bin Khattab, the second caliph of Islam, said that he would take responsibility even if a dog were to go starving in his community, under his rule. And yet for some reason, many of us don't find this to be very problematic. Shall we go on? These are images around Malaysia, Bukit Bintang. I think that's in Selangor. That's Cameron Highlands, for those who like to go there for vacation. That's Terengganu. I love Terengganu, except for this part. That is in Penang, a river. And that is at Batu Caves, after Taipusun. So first off, what is littering? I think that's a very commonsensical understanding of what littering is. General definition is the personal disposal of waste that leads to unnecessary and excessive pollution, often out of intent or negligence. It doesn't carry with it any sort of moral implication or a legal implication, so I want you to understand this is a general definition. We should perhaps focus more on a legal definition of littering, which is the individual and unlawful depositing of waste external to government-designated containments. Okay? This is a very important distinction that needs to be noted, because when we try to define littering in law, we want to make it as specific as possible for the sake of applying consequences. If we make it too general, then it's easy to make loopholes. Okay? Let's move on. I'll go as fast as possible here with this. I think I'm frozen. Oh, okay. So before we get into how littering affects Malaysia and the legal implications, let's go into the waste production and some indirect evidence as to how littering affects Malaysia, or Malaysian society in general. There actually aren't any studies on the extent of littering in Malaysia. However, there are many studies on waste, on the amount of waste produced. So for instance, between 800 grams to 1.25 kg of solid waste is produced per person daily in Malaysia. Per person, okay? Some of you have some not so happy faces on. That's good. 8,000 tons of food alone is wasted daily. That's 3 million tons annually. We talk about saving people from starvation. Maybe we should stop wasting so much food. There's no additional money needed to do this. We just need to stop wasting 3 million tons of food per year in one country. So how does this affect, I mean, is there any sort of evidence that we have that this is going towards littering, it's not being disposed of properly? Actually, we do. Malaysia is a very wet environment, as you notice. A lot of rain, a lot of rivers, okay, a lot of lakes. 300,000 tons of garbage are dumped into Malaysian rivers per year. 300,000. Of that amount, the Department of Environment, which monitors 437 rivers in Malaysia, has classified 161 as being polluted. 5 of them are dead. What does that mean? That means no fish, no life can exist within those rivers. And if you swim in them, you'll probably come out with some sort of disease or bacterial infection. To fully clean Malaysian rivers annually would cost 600 million ringgit a year. Right now, the government is only allocating 141 million over a 6-year period. That means the garbage is building up in our rivers. It's not being cleaned adequately. Consequences of littering. Okay. All right, here we go. Aesthetic, meaning the pleasurable sight of things as they are. There are aesthetic consequences. It just doesn't look nice. And this is especially relevant when we're talking about tourism, in the tourism industry. People do not want to come to a country and see garbage everywhere. Okay? India may be a very high tourist industry, have a very large tourist industry, but most people don't like to go into the areas that are polluted. Financial. Cleaning up this mess costs a considerable amount of money, as we mentioned earlier with the rivers. Okay? Health-wise, there are a lot of diseases that can be produced through littering. Okay? Two of the major ones include dengue, actually. When there's enough garbage in a river, what happens? It usually clogs the ends. And what occurs is, during that time, the water becomes what? Still. And where is that a breeding ground for? Mosquitoes. What else? Rats. Rats have an abundant amount of food. Okay? Not only that, but they found that many bacterial diseases in Malaysia, particularly, are produced by rat feces and urine, which evaporates in the water. And if you inhale it, you can actually get an infection. So those who tend to hang around these rivers that are very polluted in lakes, etc., or generally areas like Pasar Malam, where there are you see many rats running around, they are at higher risk of getting disease. Okay? Imagine how much in healthcare we could save and how much we could allocate to other things like research, etc., if we didn't have to worry so much about people getting ill because of our pollution problem. So let's discuss in Islamic environmentalism. The Maqasidi approach should focus on one foundational concept. There are many concepts, but one foundational concept which I think many have already discussed earlier, so I won't go into too much detail. Holding responsibility over creation. Okay? Being a khalifa of creation. I've defined it as holding responsibility because I want to emphasize the activity here. I'm not trying to emphasize, yes, it's stewardship, it's things like this. I want to emphasize the verb, okay, not the noun. Holding responsibility over creation, all right? Having responsibility, all right? What does this entail? Our purpose in life is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a caretaker of creation, all right? The Quran mentions that as human beings, we were created for the sake of what? Worshipping Allah. This is correct. However, He has specified a specific role for us in the Quran. And He states, I am putting a successor on earth. He defines human beings before creating them in one specific way. I am creating a successor. Okay? Our purpose is already defined by this word. Next. And I want you to focus on this real quick. It's not so much in terms of man that I want you to focus on, but look at the way that the Quran is mentioning the rest of creation in this respect. This is going to another point. We offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains, yet they refused. They refused. The mountains refused. The heavens refused. To refuse means that there's agency, sentience, some sort of component of living there. We don't see it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined it as such. Okay? Okay. The seven heavens and the earth and everyone in them glorify Him. There is not a single thing that does not celebrate His praise. Again, a sense of agency, okay, a sense of activity. All right? This is very significant because I want you to understand something here. All right, so this goes into my next point. So the Prophet ﷺ said, who is the most excellent among, he was asked, who is the most excellent among the Muslims? He said, one from whose tongue and hands the other Muslims are secure. So has anybody found the logical connection in what I'm trying to imply here? I'm going to make a demonstration. Please do not get offended. That was quite rude of what I just did, throwing that tissue on the ground. Now imagine I came up to you because I was too lazy to put this in the garbage can, and I threw it on your face. How would you feel? Now imagine I took this 1 kg of trash in this garbage can, and I dumped it on you. How would you feel? You feel disgusted, offended. How dare you dirty me? How dare you violate me, my honor, my dignity? And yet, the creation itself as a whole, the mountains, the rivers, the animals, who submit to Allah on a daily basis, who are more Muslim than many of us in this room, we dump on them every single day. I want you to consider that analogy, please. More importantly, the Prophet ﷺ stated about the earth was made for me to be purifying, made for me, purifying, and a place for prayer, a masjid. Do we go into the mosque and throw garbage? Yet, for some reason, it's very prevalent in a mostly Muslim majority country. Spitting in the mosque is a sin. I don't want you to think that you can't go and spit outside now. You can actually. This is not a fiqh discussion, but I'm trying to make an analogy here, okay? Spitting in the masjid, something that can even be considered pure in some regards. It's not exactly that dirty. It's from us. But spitting is considered a sin. But we would never dare to throw trash in a mosque. Yet for some reason, when we walk on our earth, a place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made for us, we just negligently throw things on the ground as though it doesn't mean anything. This is why this ayah makes sense. And you've heard it many times earlier in many presentations. Corruption has flourished on land and sea as a result of people's actions, and He will make them taste the consequences of some of their actions so that they may turn back. The consequences of their actions is because the creation is fighting back. An eye for an eye. You do to me, I do unto you. You pollute me, I pollute you. You want to put garbage on this soil, you will eat from it. And you will suffer just like that plant has suffered. Just like those animals have suffered. Whatever you catch from those polluted rivers will cause you to have defects in the future, will cause you to have bacterial infections, will cause even harm to your own children. This is not something that is imposed upon us. It is a natural consequence of our own actions. An eye for an eye. So let's go into Malaysian law and environment. I believe I have about 5 or less than that. So I'm going to try to get in as quickly as possible. Malaysian law currently only has 3 major acts which actually refer to litter. And that is Act 127, the Environmental Quality Act, the Street Drainage and Building Act, and the Local Government Act. Actually, none of these acts refer to littering specifically. They don't even mention the word littering. They mention the actual behavior of disposing of waste improperly on a personal level, but the word littering does not exist in any of these acts. In fact, the word littering only exists in the local government acts, the bylaws of certain local governments, okay? And they're broken up in the actual punishments, and the definition of personal pollution is different in each act. Okay, so this may be no surprise then as to why policies are very difficult and enforcement is very difficult when 3 separate acts would have 3 separate definitions of personal pollution and consequences, it's not consolidated. So as a result of that, there's a disunification of law and enforcement. Okay, let's go on. Current Malaysian enforcement and awareness. In Johor recently, they started giving police officers special sunglasses to take video recording of litter bugs. Only 6 have been bought for over 1,100 ringgit or so. 6 police officers have them. They've been somewhat effective, but not much actually. And awareness campaigns. I don't know if you've heard of this one in Penang. They've been calling litter bugs monkeys, and saying if you litter, you're no better than a monkey. In fact, more people are offended by this awareness ad in Penang than they are about the fact that there's littering in their state. There have been many reports about people complaining about these awareness ads, saying this is too insulting and offensive and it's not right. Though it's quite factual, but let's go on. So I want to get into necessary reforms because this is the most important part of this lecture. So there needs to be legal reforms, enforcement reforms, educational reforms, and public event reforms. And this also goes back to the maqasid because we need to look at everything holistically. We also need to understand that everything needs to be dealt with in a certain way, and even in many cases harshly. Many people say that you cannot legislate morality. I disagree. You can legislate morality. Okay? You can teach morality, but you also have to legislate. Parenting is not just teaching your children. You must also punish them when necessary in order to teach them what the right values are. So we need to do the same thing in society. So for legal reforms, I have proposed the following. Consolidate all environmental laws under Environmental Quality Act. Very simple. Instead of all these separate acts that deal with pollution, put it in one act. One definition for everything. Very simple. Okay, define littering as the individual and unlawful depositing of waste external to government designated containers. Differentiate between minor and major offenses of littering based on the total amount disposed of. For instance, anything below 1.5 should have a minor offense. Anything above 1.5 should have a major offense. Okay? Holistic punishments. A mandatory minimum fine of RM 1,000, including community service of 2 working days, 16 hours, within areas of severe litter concentration or high pollution zones. In Singapore, they have community service for people who litter. We don't have it here. It's not mandatory. It needs to be. Legal reforms too. Any of you who need these slides later on, please ask. I will have them emailed to you. If you're a motorist, and the reason I mention motorists is because in a recent report they found that motorists were the ones who actually littered the most on land. Okay? If a motorist, a mandatory fine shall begin at 2,000 ringgit, including 2 working days of community service and a 6-month suspension of the owner's license and road tax. Okay? If the offender or caretaker does not pay the fine nor performs community service with a justified excuse, a warrant for arrest shall be issued and they imprisoned for a minimum of 6 months, including an additional 48 working days, 384 hours of community service. Thank you very much. 5 minutes. I think I should be able to close it off in 5 minutes. Offenders under the age of 16 will be forced to attend mandatory environmental rehabilitation programs within their schools, including a minimum 300 ringgit fine on their caretakers, their parents. Okay? If they fail to complete the program or if the fine is not paid, they will be barred from graduating from the respective levels. Enforcement reforms. Create a separate task force with a scout out HPZs and issue summons for environmental offenses only. The force may be called the Environmental Task Force. This is how you get the public involved, through incentives. Okay? Create civilian task force trained by the ETF with power to issue fines and submit evidence. Include dash cams for each motorist. Incentives include 50 ringgit for each proven offense. You prove somebody littered, you give them a fine, you get 50 ringgit. Who wouldn't want to do that? That's easy money. Use cameras on highway HPZs for motorist offenders. Remove 70% of all public trash bins and relocate them to HPZs with cameras. Now, why would I say this? Why would you remove 70% of all trash bins? Isn't that the problem? No, actually it isn't. The removal of trash bins would mean that they would be more cognizant of where to put their garbage, 1, and 2, the possibility of catching offenders would rise dramatically. Okay? And this will also help to lessen waste, actually. Enforcement reforms. Photos of pedestrian littering suspects shall be posted as wanted, and any information on their identity may be forwarded anonymously to the ETF for cash reward. Okay? Given the ETF, and this is another special point, this is actually done in Hong Kong recently. Give the ETF littering bags, so when they find somebody littering, they can just pick it up with something and put it in a bag, okay, for later for DNA testing. If the offender claims they didn't litter, they make an appeal, you put a DNA test. If they were found guilty, then they have to pay for the test and the additional fine. Publicize the above to the public as an awareness campaign. Okay? Let's look at educational reforms. Environmental curricula should be made mandatory in science courses from primary to secondary levels. Likewise, detention centers within schools should incorporate environmental rehabilitation programs. Environmental awareness can be fostered through mandatory cleanup days where students, faculty, and staff participate in a monthly or bi-monthly session to clean up their campuses and surrounding areas. A few hours a day, okay, not a bad thing. The number of student offenders or environmental mismanagement of a school can result in the eventual firing of administrative staff or the closing of the school altogether. And finally, last but not least, public event reforms. Okay, this is especially for religious events. 1 cup plate rule. Entry into an event should hand out recyclable and reusable event-sanctioned cups, eatingware, and portable garbage bags. Food and drink will not be given unless participants have these items, meaning no outside utensils. If you buy something, you use the same thing over and over throughout the event. That means you only dispose of 1 cup when you were there. That also allows the event organizers to measure how much waste they should be having at the end of the day. Okay? Next, food and drink not finished shall be given extra charge for disposal, 5 ringgit. You don't finish your food, the restaurants can charge you an additional amount. If you think this is funny, we have 8,000 tons of food wasted a day in Malaysia, in a Muslim majority country. It is inexcusable. If anybody complains about this, then I'm sorry, they need to eat less, or they need to put less on their plate. Along with 1 cup plate rule, pamphlets shall be handed out about environmental awareness from their particular religious perspectives. For instance, at Batu Caves festivals, it needs to be mandatory to hand religious rulings from a Hindu perspective with support from Malaysian environmental laws and penalties. So once you hand out these cups, you give them the reason why through religious perspectives so that they're more inclined to do so, and also tell them that the penalties for not following these rules will be very harsh. Okay? Thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Asadullah.